doesn't really work. And that the people we thought were in charge probably aren't really in charge. They're taking orders from Benjamin Netanyahu, who got us into this war. They're trying to erase that from history. You'll never see that on Wikipedia. But it's true. That's a fact. And they admitted it. Don't let them steal the truth from you. 10 years from now, they'll be like, what are you talking about, anti-Semite? No, that happened. But is there something in it for us? And has anybody explained to the guys risking their lives and to the rest of the country paying for it and grieving over the loss of our troops, like, what's the point? And no one has. So at that point, you have to wonder, like, is that legitimate? Can you just tell people go do this without explaining why? Well, they signed up for it. No, you still don't treat people like that. You don't treat countries like this. And in the course of all of this, you have to wonder what happens to our country. If there's no stated benefit to us from this war, ask yourself, would you ever do something like this if it didn't help the country you represented? You probably wouldn't, right? What does that say about how the people in charge feel about our country? Well, you don't have to guess. Look around the country. Been to an airport recently? TSA going on strike. Of course, there are reasons for that, and the Democrats are responsible. Fine. But in a country the size of a continent, you need internal air travel, period. Not simply for commerce, but so people can see their kids, etc. So you can have a functioning country. And all of a sudden we don't. And then it turns out, oh my gosh, someone sent an ambulance across a runway and a plane hit it and people were killed. Well, how'd that happen? Because there was inadequate air traffic control. Well, that's been known for a while. Has anyone fixed it? Apparently not. Then a barge runs into the Key Bridge in Baltimore, kind of a critical piece of infrastructure. And as of this morning, it looks like not even close to being rebuilt. That was a long time ago. Then you drive around the country and you think, wow, looks kind of shabby. Not all of it. Very pretty places. The landscape's amazing to the extent it hasn't been destroyed by solar farms and CBD outlets. But the actual infrastructure of the country is not great. Our airports are not great. When you fly internationally, you're amazed, including to poor countries. Like, wow, why do they have such nice airports here in Mumbai or Bombay or whatever they're calling it now? I thought this was a poor place. I read about Calcutta. I thought people were dying of starvation. Why is their airport nicer than LaGuardia? What is this? And what it is neglect. It's neglect. It's what happens when your leaders are so outwardly focused managing their empire and stoking their dreams of power that they forget to tend to the country they run. And at this point, it just absolutely couldn't be clearer what's going on. Our leaders, bipartisan basis now, are so distracted by what's happening outside of our borders that what's happening inside is becoming, dire may be an overstatement, certainly depressing. What are the unemployment numbers? We could do an hour on this. Maybe we will. It depends how you read them. So if you got here from West Africa or Somalia or Punjab or Bangladesh, you probably have a job. Probably make it a lot more than you made in the country you grew up in. But if you were born here, you're less likely to have a job. These are the numbers right now. The unemployment for native-born Americans is going up. And that's before the energy shock and the rollout of AI. Really? How could that happen? And if you didn't know that, how did you not know that? That's not picking a fight with anyone or criticizing anybody. That's like a baseline measurement of how your country's doing. The people who are born here, not the immigrants to whom you're offering the American dream, but the people who thought they would live the American dream because they were born here. There's birthright citizens and they're paying for everything. How are they doing? Not great. And by that measure, it's not improving. So, okay, how much are we spending on this war? Unclear, of course. Nothing is clear in war. You can't get an accurate count of anything, including the dead. But it seems like about $1 billion a day. Probably more. It's classified. $1 billion a day. You see the point. You give up a lot when you wage a war. And when you wage a war in return for no promise of a return, other than the theoretical safety you feel because Iran, which you probably thought about like 4 times in the last 10 years, doesn't have nukes, which they told us in June they didn't have anyway. Do you feel better? No, the whole thing's ridiculous. So I think the rest of us probably need to pay pretty close attention as we're tempted to be distracted by following what's happening in Iran and the Persian Gulf. Pay close attention to what's happening here in this country, because things change fast in war. That's the number one thing to know. Societies are completely transformed by war. In fact, every major societal change, the big ones, have come during war. And the bigger the war, the bigger the change. And some changes have been good, like all change, and some changes have been, well, really bad. But whatever changes in progress is likely to be accelerated during wartime. So if the country's feeling a little weak in some area, it's likely to become very weak in that area. And then things will happen that nobody expected. But all of it is likely to happen during war. So this moment is profound, but also kind of hard to read. So there are a couple of things you should be aware of that are happening that you might not know about. And they're going to have long-term effects for the world and for the United States. And one of them is the destruction of Europe. Now, why should we care about Europe? Well, in the United States, most of our ancestors came from Europe. And so there's that sentimental attachment, that cultural attachment, that religious attachment. That's the Christian West that we sometimes talk about. Christian West, what is that? Well, it's like Istanbul in this direction. That's the Christian West. And Europe is the bulk of it. But maybe as important, certainly geostrategically as important, if China rises and takes the East, what do we have here in the West? Well, we have Europe and we have the Americas. And that's our world. That's what we influence. Those are our actual allies because they live close to us. Much as you might like the Philippines, in 30 years, will the United States have a lot of influence in the Philippines? Probably not. Anything in the South China Sea is going to belong to China. Whether you want that or not is totally irrelevant. So what happens to Europe really, really matters to us here in the United States. And despite having a lot of silly leaders, we basically are aligned on the level of values. I mean, they're like liberal and annoying and eat cheese and all that stuff. But ultimately, if you're looking around the world and trying to figure out who are my real allies, who are my baseline allies, would be the Europeans. Well, one of the things you notice if you pay any attention to this at all is that the main victim of this war after the 6 Gulf states is Europe. Because it's their energy that's being destroyed, both by Iran and probably also by Israel, despite a lot of lying about it. It's their energy. And by the way, if you're paying any attention at all, you may have noticed that just the other day, the Ukrainians, really a proxy for, if there was ever a proxy for the American deep state, it's the Ukrainian government, just went and hit a Russian energy installation. Really? So who's the victim of that? Europe. Now, why would Europe be the victim? Too little has been written, and very little even is noticed about this, but the hostility that Israeli government leaders feel toward Europe whenever they speak about it is very, very obvious. So here's the former leader of Israel, Naftali Bennett, talking just the other day, maybe I think yesterday, about Europe. Watch this.
Had we not acted, all of Europe would be under a terrible nuclear ballistic missile menace. So we're fighting your war, and we expect not to be, criticized in and on, but we expect your backing. That would be the decent thing to do. I think any European leader who sort of says, this isn't our problem, so when will it become your problem? When they have a nuclear weapon? When the missile is on its way to Madrid? When it hits Madrid or Barcelona? Is that when you're going to wake up? So we're doing the fighting. We didn't ask you for any help, nothing. All we're doing is fighting against this horrible radical Islamist menace. We're reducing and hopefully eliminating this threat. And instead of thanking us, you're criticizing us.
We're the victims. Why haven't you thanked us enough, Europe? We pushed the United States, which has bases in all your countries, a fellow NATO member of the United States, we pushed the United States into a war that shafts you completely to end a threat that was not actually a threat to you. And in so doing, we constricted your energy supply to the extent that you're going to have a depression in Europe. And by the way, in case that's not enough, we're going to give you a migrant crisis. We're going to give you a migrant crisis because Iran is pretty far from Milwaukee, but not that far from Paris. And the aftermath of every Israeli-inspired war over the past 30 years has been to send desperate migrants into Europe. So if you're one of those people who consumes dumb stuff on the internet, it's like, how did this happen? London's becoming Muslim. Well, it happens because the Brits hate themselves, of course, and masochistically want to import people who don't share their values. But it also happens because we have wars in the Middle East that have downstream consequences. And this war, the biggest country in the region, watching its infrastructure get destroyed, will inspire mass migration. And ultimately, a lot of those people are winding up in Europe. But Naftali Bennett is saying to Europe, you haven't thanked us for that. So what you have here is the never-ending battle, the real battle, which is over the moral high ground. That's the real battle. Who occupies the moral high ground? And high ground is a real thing. If you're in the high ground, you aim down at people. You've got a clearer field of fire. You're in charge. And if you control the moral terms, if the conversation begins with, hey, you've wronged me, I'm the victim, there's really no way to win that fight. And that's what Naftali Bennett was just doing. And that's what Benjamin Netanyahu does in every sentence. Hey, no one suffered like Israel has suffered. Therefore, shut up and do what we want and don't complain about it. In fact, thank us for it. So you should know that Europe is in very serious trouble because of this, and that matters to Americans. But the concerns that we're going to have to deal with, we pray not, here in the United States are not limited to the slow death of our true allies. They would include attacks here. Both acts of terror that are pretty predictable. When you kill religious leaders in foreign countries, it does tend to inspire extremism. It's not an excuse for it. It's horrifying. But that's why you don't want to do anything to encourage religious extremism, particularly if you pretend you don't like it. Maybe don't kill ayatollahs and you'll get less of it, obviously. But that's not just it. The United States has never engaged in a policy openly of targeting other heads of state because countries don't do that. Why don't they do that? Because it's not a precedent they want to set. It's one of several precedents that countries hesitate before setting in warfare. Don't assassinate the head of state because we don't want our head of state to be assassinated. Don't openly target civilian infrastructure, of course. And if you can help it, don't call for absolute, total, abject surrender. Because that's a lot to ask of any nation. And it tends to inspire people to fight to the bitter end when you start talking like that. And when you start talking like that, you are opening yourself up. And maybe most of all, don't say out loud that we're replacing a government in order to control it and steal its resources. Now, why wouldn't you do that? Two reasons. One is a kind of abstract moral reason, because it's wrong. That's why theft is illegal in every country in the world. You can't just say, I want that, I'm going to shoot you. We have laws against that. And those laws are rooted in the understanding that you're not allowed to just take something because you want it by force. We think that's immoral. That's the basis of our legal system and of our religion and of most religions, by the way. So there's that. But the other reason is because you don't want it done to you. And it might be a good time just to remind ourselves that the United States has a lot of resources. In fact, by some measures, it's the most resource-dense nation in the world. And it's also, by, say, Nigerian standards, pretty lightly populated. 350 million people spread out across a continent, the prettiest continent on the planet, with abundant everything. Now, we don't extract a lot of it because we decided we're just too rich to mine things, but it's still here. We also have the largest freshwater reserves of any country in the world. Maybe after Russia, but certainly close. Massive amounts of fresh water. Most fertile farmland in the world. abundant oil and gas. So we have resources too. And so if you set up a precedent, because we make the rules, because we have been the beneficiary of this unipolar system, we're in charge of the world. And the new rule is, if you've got a lot of resources and we want them and we can just overthrow your government and kill the people who run it and take them for ourselves, is that the standard? Apparently. Then at some point, it's at least conceivable that we would have to suffer that standard. And you just pray that that never happens. But it's worth thinking past like next Wednesday and acknowledging that it could. And if we're blowing up other people's civilian infrastructure, which we have done for a while now, since we blew up Nord Stream, because we don't like Putin because he's bad. He's just bad. But that was the vital energy artery into Europe, our supposed allies, and we just blew it up. Proving simultaneously that we didn't care about global warming, of course, because that was the largest man-made emission of CO2 in history, but that we're disregarding our own rules. Okay, so we have to live by the new standard. It's a very long way of saying there could be consequences to this. Consequences, you don't have to be some sort of liberal who loves the UN or whatever, is pro-French. Stop. If you care about the United States, you should be worried. So there was a Valero refinery in Port Arthur, Texas, on the Gulf Coast of Texas, where there are a lot of refineries, where a lot of our refined petroleum products come from. Those would include jet fuel, gasoline, diesel, all the way down to asphalt. And there was a massive explosion in it 2 days ago on a cloud, and they had a stay-in-place order, and it was high drama. And now they're saying it was just a industrial accident. No one was killed, thank God. But it happened, and maybe it was an accident. Accidents do happen, and just because a whole bunch of food processing and energy and ammunition plants in the United States seem to be blowing up over the past 5 years doesn't mean they're not all accidents. They absolutely could be. Have no information to the contrary. But if we're blowing up other people's civilian infrastructure and partnering with a country that blows up other people's infrastructure as a matter of course, just took out a ton of bridges in Lebanon yesterday for some reason, Israel, and we think that's fine, then at some point you have to wonder about our infrastructure in this giant, largely unprotected country. Could there be blowback that hurts us? That's not a liberal position. That's like a common sense position. If you're trying to protect your own country, you have to keep that in mind. But no one is keeping it in mind at all. So there is a potential physical threat to the United States, and without going on and on and on and on and on about it, you should know that it exists, and it's one of the downsides of this war. The other downside that people are not considering in any great detail, mentioned it a minute ago, but are the long-term effects of Israel's strategic goal in this war, which, as noted, differs from ours completely, which is territorial expansion. What exactly does Israel want? We don't know, but they clearly want to extend their borders, or at least the buffer zone around post-67 Israel. Whatever their actual goals are, while the rest of us are focused on whether we're going to invade Karg Island, probably not, by the way, who knows? The Israelis are tending to their own agenda using the cover of our military and our tax dollars, okay? It's just a fact. So one of the things they're doing is trying to grab southern Lebanon. Now, why does that matter? What's Lebanon? Who cares? Well, I don't know. If you're a Christian, you care, because Lebanon has the largest population of Christians in the region by far. In fact, it was a Christian country for centuries. There's a Christian president of Lebanon. Did you know that? Every time Lebanon is mentioned, it's through the lens of like Israel's interest. But if you're a Christian, you don't have to hate Israel, but you may have different interests. Like, what about the Christians? Well, Lebanon has a Christian president. The head of the military in Lebanon is Christian. And there are a lot of Christian villages, ancient Christian villages Jesus probably walked through, have been Christian ever since. Only 2,000 years. And they're being destroyed because under the cover of this war paid for and led by us, Israel has decided to take a big chunk of Lebanon. Watch.
Israel's defense minister on Tuesday said the country's military will control southern Lebanon up to the Litani River. The remarks are the first time Israel has clearly spelled out its intent to seize swaths of territory that make up nearly a tenth of Lebanon. Israel has been trading fire with Iranian-backed Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon. That's after Hezbollah struck Israel following joint Israeli-American attacks on Iran. Rockets damaged buildings and vehicles in northern Israel on Tuesday. Katz has previously threatened Lebanon's government that it would lose territory if it did not disarm Hezbollah. Israel has destroyed 5 bridges crossing the Litani River and has accelerated the demolition of homes in Lebanese villages close to the Israeli border. Katz said, quote, "The principle is clear. If there is terror and rockets, there will be no homes and residents, and the IDF will remain inside."
Did you know that was happening? And why does it matter? Well, it matters because this episode in history is going to end at a certain point. This war will end. Pray it's sooner rather than later, but at some point, all wars do end. And at that point, the truth comes out. Because the truth about everything will come out. Everything. Just a matter of where on the timeline it does. But at some point, we will know what actually happened in this period and over the last 2.5 years. So if you look at the internet and you see pictures of war crimes committed in Gaza or the West Bank or now in Lebanon, you can't be certain they're all real. And of course, the shills on the internet will say they're all fake, but they're not all fake, actually. Some of them are real. Tens of thousands of people, non-combatants, women and children, have been killed by the Israeli military using our weapons, American weapons, paid for by the U.S. Congress. And there will be a reckoning over that. And there are indications, real indications, not anti-Semitic propaganda, but actual indications that war crimes have been committed. Torturing people, killing people, unarmed, non-combatants, kids on purpose. There's a lot of that. And some of it's probably fake. Some of it is propaganda, undoubtedly. But some of it isn't. And in the end, we're going to know. Because we always know in the end. And so you have to ask yourself, the people who are defending this and paying for it, would you want to be one of those people when we find this out? How about the religious leaders, the American evangelical leaders, not rank and file evangelicals who, if they knew, would be horrified, but the people who run the biggest evangelical associations in the United States, the people who are in Liberty University, for example, or Franklin Graham, these are household names. Have they said anything about the destruction of churches and ancient Christian villages in a country in the Middle East with a Christian president? Do they even know Lebanon had a Christian president? Who knows? They haven't said word one about it. Why? Well, that's a good question. That was the question that a lot of people asked the Reich Church after the Second World War ended in Germany. How could you have gone along with that? And there was not a good answer other than, I don't know, didn't want to offend the powerful. There is going to be a consequence to this, and one of them is very easy to predict. Big evangelical institutions, which have done good things, by the way. If you're for the family and you're pro-life, you're grateful for what they've done. For their personal decency of the people in the pews, a lot of really decent people. But the leaders of American evangelical Christianity, not all, but some, will have no legitimacy at all when this is over. Where were you when a country that you pledged fealty to was murdering Christians, your brothers in Christ in the Middle East? Where were you when people were starving, when kids were starving in Gaza? And the Gaza aid program was run by some kind of crypto-Christian preacher. Like, someone's going to have to answer for that. These people will have to answer for that. And if you're wondering, in this moment where there's a religious awakening underway in the West, there's really no question about that. If you're wondering why not a lot of new converts are going to the evangelical institutions, this may be why. There's going to be big change. Because remember, once again, the truth always comes out. Always. And this will affect American politics, maybe more than anything we've seen over the past 20 years. It'll change the Republican Party forever, that's for sure. Most of the polling you see about the attitudes in the Republican Party toward this war, polling Fox News viewers, polling MAGA people, How do you define MAGA? Well, people who agree with anything the administration does. Well, by definition, they agree with this. But people under 50 also vote. In fact, because they did vote in the last election, Donald Trump is currently president. And it's not close there. Try to find one who supports this. Good luck. Unless he works at Liberty University, probably not for it. So that will have massive consequences. Massive. Is the Democratic Party going to absorb all those people? Who knows? But there will be big political change because of this. And the reason is really simple, because the people who endorse this and lie to us about it and selectively ignore the suffering of other human beings, including their fellow Christians, have lost their moral authority. And they will not regain it anytime soon. And you just hope that this ends soon enough that the nation itself doesn't lose its moral authority, because that is, in the end, the most compelling kind of authority. That's where your actual power comes from, is from your decency, which is far more powerful than nuclear weapons. In the end, it's more powerful than anything. And it is one of the main reasons, more than Coca-Cola and Marlboros and blue jeans and capitalism and the democracy agenda, the decency of the American empire, often indecent, but compared to one other empire, it was the decency of America's stewardship of the world that made it powerful. And now it's very fashionable to say, oh, it was always bad, and throw up Mossadegh, and it was always bad. But the rest of the world didn't feel that way about the United States for most of that time, most of the Cold War, for example. But a lot of the world now does feel that way. And that's a loss for the United States. It's not a matter of caring what foreigners think, though an awful lot of people care what Israel thinks, but they don't care what anyone else thinks. But it's a loss of power and authority for us. It's a huge loss. It makes us weaker and more endangered. And the final thing to remember, maybe the thing to meditate on about this moment, and you may not catch this because you're breathlessly watching Fox News to find out if we're going to invade the Isle of Karg. The thing that you should be paying attention to is the change in American authority and the level of power our authorities domestically here in the U.S. feel like they can assume, because that always expands during war. Wartime leaders become authoritarian, every single one of them. And authorities below the executive also become authoritarian. Did you know that in 1942, when Franklin Roosevelt issued his famous executive order to intern about 120,000 Japanese Americans, mostly in the West, Oregon, Washington, California, in concentration camps, did you know the most interesting fact of that decision is often omitted from it? The overwhelming majority of them were American citizens, actual citizens or legal residents, but 2/3 were American citizens with full citizenship who'd been convicted of no crime, hadn't even been charged with a crime, but they were thrown into concentration camps for 3 years and lost their property. And there was some effort in the 80s to be like, oh, we're so sorry. And also, who really cares? Imperial Japan was bad. But these people weren't actually subjects of Imperial Japan. They were American citizens. And they were thrown into concentration camps with their families and no one really said anything? I mean, it's complicated. It's complicated. That's not complicated, actually. That's totally wrong. You can't treat American citizens that way if you're the U.S. government, ever. And yet, Roosevelt was able to do it because it was 1942 and the war wasn't looking good. And that's the other thing to remember, that as wars get tougher, say if you commit ground troops and find yourself stuck in a place and can't get out, it's happened many, many times. As things get tougher and leaders become less popular and people become more enraged and discouraged and sad and distracted, governments can assume powers unimaginable in peacetime, even more dramatically than they did during the COVID epidemic. That can happen. And it may be starting to happen. Speaking for myself, I've been threatened with more FBI investigations in the last month than during the entire Biden administration. So maybe that's an indicator of something. 2 more than during the entire Biden administration, which I criticized every single day for its duration. So there's that. But here's one pretty specific example, a piece of tape that should tell you what to be on guard against. And that's at the local level, not at the level of federal law enforcement, but like your local sheriff, assuming powers that no man short of God possesses, and certainly no one in the United States possesses. In flat, obvious contradiction to our founding documents, to the Bill of Rights, this Sheriff Bouchard from Michigan, has decided that he's going to arrest and imprison people who make memes mocking him. This is real from last Friday. Watch this.
I give you this by way of example. Some pond scum felt empowered and emboldened enough to put this picture of me up to try to threaten and intimidate me, which, of course, he didn't do because I signed up for this. And by the way, the person that did this said a bunch of terrible things, not just against me, but against a lot of groups and individuals, who, by the way, was arrested today in Wisconsin. My point is this, though. If this person is emboldened and empowered enough or feels safe enough to do this for me, what does he do to a kid? What does he do to a Jewish family walking down the street?
Well, he didn't do anything. He made an ugly meme. But the sheriff's not intimidated. I signed up for this. I knew the risks of the job when I became your sheriff. This guy's like some former Republican politician in the state of Michigan. I knew the risks. I signed up for this. Someone made a funny meme about you or an ugly meme about you. It's a meme. It's an image on the internet that was on Instagram, not on the battlefield. You faced no physical risk. You just admitted that. And you had the guy arrested in another state and he's in jail? How is this not leading to mass protests? Why did they not shut your sheriff's department down? Where's the Department of Justice? Where's the Civil Rights Division? Are you allowed to just arrest people who make fun of you? Oh, it's so ugly. It's anti-Semitism. Okay, well, it's racism. You're mocking the vaccine. It's all the same. These are all pretexts that we take literally because we're dumb. And no one wants to be an anti-Semite or a racist or deny science, whatever they tell you your crime is. The actual crime is always the same. It's mocking and impeding the authoritarian impulses of the people in charge. It's making fun of the sheriff, which is exactly what this criminal did. But the sheriff's okay tonight. He's going to be all right. He signed up for this. The rest of us did not sign up for this. This is illegal under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. It's also totally incompatible with what it is to live in this country. You get to say what you think. There is no legal category of hate speech. There's only speech the people in charge hate. So this guy should be the subject of a federal investigation like in about 1 minute after that hits the internet. Don't think he has been. Let's hope he will be. But that's exactly the kind of change that can bubble up in your country during war. And it's like some kooky sheriff Republican. That's the Republican? That's the Free Speech Party guy? Really? And it's in Michigan. And who even knows? Some county in Michigan. And all of a sudden you wake up and you get arrested for a meme because it's hate speech, which means it's speech the people in charge hate. And then if this goes on long enough, or if the United States are to really suffer, it gets more extreme. There are already neocons saying if there's a terror attack in the United States as blowback from the war that they pushed for, that they will make certain that people who oppose the war are arrested for the terror attack. Follow the logic chain. Oh, you can't because there isn't one. They're openly saying we will use the deaths of Americans to settle our political scores using your government law enforcement. Not so different from we will settle our ancient tribal disputes on another continent using your military. Kind of the same principle. But it's not acceptable here. If the Iran war was bad, allowing the U.S. government to arrest, persecute, investigate, spy on U.S. citizens for exercising their God-given rights is worse. And you'll know it's bad when they start talking about a draft. Now, what is a draft? Well, of course, it's the definition of tyranny. It is somehow the right of a government to take the fruit of its population, its young, fit citizens, the ones who are supposed to build the civilization, continue the country, take them and force them to risk their lives, and in some cases die, for a decision they didn't make, and in this case, they don't support at all. What percentage of 18-year-old American men support the war in Iran? Haven't seen the polling. Imagine it's quite a bit below 30%. Maybe even lower than that. And by the time we get to a draft, you can be assured it'll be even lower than that. So that would be tyranny. If there's another definition of tyranny, forcing people to die for a war for another country when your country is not even conceivably in peril of like invasion, except the long-term kind created by immigration, but an imminent invasion of foreign troops. But, we went into this war because Benjamin Netanyahu wanted us to, and it's not going well, and you need to fight that war at the risk of your life, even though you hate it and have never really understood what it's about because everyone lied to you about it. And if you don't do that, we'll arrest you and put you in jail. I think that's the definition of tyranny. And simply because it's happened in the past doesn't make it any less tyrannical. But don't take my word for it. So want to bring you now an interview that we did a short time ago with a man called Jim Webb, James Webb III. And if the name sounds familiar, that's because he is from one of the most famous military families in the United States. His father was Navy Secretary, a U.S. Senator. And Jim Webb, the man we're about to speak to, was himself an enlisted United States Marine, third in a row in his family, a family that, as he'll tell you, has fought in every American conflict since the French and Indian Wars. And we thought we would push him a little bit on what it would look like if those fabled boots on the ground that Fox News so badly wants to commit actually came to pass. What would that look like? And why are we doing this? And how would it work? And most critically, what would the end result be? And we thought it was a pretty interesting conversation, so we hope you will stay for it. We are strongly pro-dog on this show. We make no secret of that. Dogs are one of the great blessings of this life. And to keep them healthy, we recommend Dutch. It's the solution to skyrocketing veterinary costs. Why are those costs so high? Well, private equity, in case you didn't already know that. Big investors have bought up veterinary clinics across the country and doubled the amount they charge. So they're exploiting your love for animals to make money. And are they providing better services? Well, if you can't afford to go to the vet, you get no services at all. We did a whole show on this, and it's really distressing. Dutch is the solution to this. Licensed veterinarians, easy remote appointments. Start with the code Tucker, plans at just $82 per year. That's like nothing compared to what you will get if you walk into a private equity-owned vet. 50% of Dutch customers say they had not seen a vet in 3 years because they couldn't afford it. Dutch fixes that. 10-minute calls, no waiting room, no clinic markup, free shipping on products, coverage for up to 5 pets. Visit Dutch.com/Tucker. Use the code Tucker for $50 off. Truly, Dutch is real. It works. We did a lot of research into this, used it before recommending it. Dutch.com/Tucker. Here he is, Jim Webb. Jim Webb, thank you for doing this very much. One of the many reasons I wanted to talk to you, in addition to the fact that you're knowledgeable and honest, is that you're a veteran of the last big American military effort, the Iraq War, and you grew up steeped in this world and have some perspective on it. So first to the question of likelihood of ground troops, we don't know, of course. We're kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen, but what's your view? Do you think the United States will commit meaningful ground forces?
I'll start by saying I hope not.
Yes.
Judging by all of the indicators that are out there, the Marines floating in, there's, I guess not even rumors, there's reports that elements of the 82nd have already been deployed forward, their command element. I think Jennifer Griffin confirmed that today. It's looking like it is. And it's looking more and more likely. And I got to say, I mean, what really concerns me is sort of the piecemeal fashion that we're going into this. from a ground fighter perspective.
Yes.
And then the bigger picture is that there has been no real debate about our involvement in Iran at all. At the congressional level, there was never really a case made to the American public. And we are charging into an environment that has not effectively been cleared according to our Constitution, nor is there consensus among the American people that this is necessary for our national security. While at the same time, it's very, very clear through the statements of the administration, such as Marco Rubio, that we are doing this because Israel decided that we should do it. Therefore, by virtue of that, it's not in our national interest. We are committing our treasure and our blood to fight somebody else's war. And it would be really great if we could have a debate about that before that happens. But you look at it, it may be too late.
I think one of the reasons that there hasn't been, a real debate, there hasn't been any meaningful demonstration anywhere against this, is that people are having trouble believing it could be true. Mm-hmm. That we'd be committing ground troops to a war with Iran. Can you just explain a little more fully why you think that might be in progress?
Sure. Well, the complicated thing about that right out of the gate is that, as an American citizen, we have not been given any type of tangible objectives for this entire operation. Is this regime change? Is this to reduce their military capacity? Is this to reopen the Straits of Hormuz, which is actually probably the biggest imperative right now? So without an end state objective, at least even at the operational level, it's very, very difficult to find a justification for it.
That's it. What you're saying is clearly true. I haven't heard anything. I pay close attention. But what does that mean for the guys who are sitting at home thinking, I'm about to head over? You said there were elements of the command of regular Army units headed over. Do they know why they're doing this?
Ultimately, if we don't know the long-term plan or even the interim plan, the medium-term plan, I doubt they know. They have an operation in front of them,
right,
which they've more than likely been briefed on that they're going to execute. They may know that, but what's the tie-in? How does this further the interests of the country? How does this further our strategic objectives around the world or even in the region? And I look at the prospects of ground troops in particular to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as an indicator that we do not have the initiative in this fight. The straits are closed, gas prices are going up, and we are looking at a scenario, by all accounts, you can talk to any number of economists about this, where if this goes on for much longer, the entire global economy could potentially be brought down. But we're already feeling the ramifications of it. So in effect, what it appears that we're doing is we are committing people to regain the initiative to open the straits. It would be a quote unquote bold or over the top stroke in order to put the Iranians on their back foot. Myself, as a former Marine, grew up in the Marine Corps. I have had a relative or ancestor fight in every single American conflict going back to the French and Indian War. It's kind of
the French and Indian War.
Correct.
That was not on CNN.
No, it was not on CNN. It may have been on OAN, but I doubt it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Appreciate it. And we've never been really career soldiers or Marines or airmen, with the exception of my grandfather, who was a career Air Force officer. We're people who step up and who fight because you can read one of my dad's books. It's in our nature.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's a sense of honor and duty to the country. When the country calls, you step up and you do your part in my family.
Yes.
And then for whatever reason, you go back to civilian society and you live your life. The career aspect has never really, appealed.
You're not in it for the free healthcare.
Not at all. Not at all. It's okay. It's find private healthcare somewhere else.
Yeah.
But when you're inside of that, right? When that's your mindset, you're going to go fight because, I can use my own experience with the Iraq War. I didn't agree with it when we went in. I had a unique perspective due to the way that I grew up about the inner workings and the lack of a strategic objective. But it was clear that something was going on. Our country needed young men to go fight, and I volunteered to go. Dropped out of college to go do it.
So you enlisted?
Correct.
You were not ROTC?
I was in ROTC, and then I went to Afghanistan with my dad in 2004. Had a chance to do some photojournalism there. Liked it so much that I came home and decided to sign up and be a Marine Corps infantryman.
So you could have been a Marine Corps officer, but you decided to be a Marine Corps infantryman instead.
Correct. It's
I've not met a lot of people who turned down the chance to be a Marine Corps officer in order to enlist in the Marine Corps.
Well,
you're pretty enthusiastic. It sounds.
I was. It just seemed like the natural place for me to be. I was amongst my peers, guys the same age, walking around Helmand Province and up on the Pakistani border.
How long between you went to Penn State?
Correct.
So one day you're at Penn State, holding a plastic beer cup, and then how long between that and finding yourself with a rifle in a foreign country?
About 18 months.
Yeah.
Roughly 18 months.
So your classmates were still at school when you were?
Correct.
Yeah.
They were graduating the summer that I was in Iraq or out, getting ready to go.
Wow.
Most of them.
Wow. Why did you do that?
Duty, patriotism. I love this country to death. Also, it's
literally unto death. I mean, that's what you're saying,
right? It's been my family's home for 400 years. On my dad's side, on my mom's side, they came over in the early 1900s from Eastern Europe, and they did the same thing. My mom's dad, my grandfather, was on Iwo Jima as a Marine. She was an Army nurse in Vietnam.
Your father was in Vietnam and your mother was an Army nurse in Vietnam?
Correct.
Both your parents are in Vietnam?
Correct.
Huh.
And it's, from my mom's side, she was, both my parents were the first in their family to go straight through college. My grandfather on my dad's side graduated college when my father was a senior in high school. He was an officer in the Air Force, and in a different time when you could fly an aircraft as a pilot because you had a high enough GT score. And he flew in World War II, he flew bombers, and then he flew in the Berlin airlift. And then he went into the missile program after that. He was a test pilot in between for jets. Very accomplished man.
Wow.
Absolute legend. But the military gave him that opportunity. And also the country gave him that opportunity to advance, advance up into society. My mom used the Army for the same reasons. My grandfather came back from World War II and got a job as a foreman in a factory in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. It was light years ahead of where their family had been. And the military was, not only a vehicle to get out, but it was also a way to kind of pay back, the opportunities that they had had. And my dad, same cut. His mom was a sharecropper in Arkansas, and my grandfather didn't come from any kind of means in Missouri. And they had found a way to succeed, and part of that was being in the military.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Spring is the most refreshing time of year. Nothing complements it better than Black Rifle coffee. Lots of it. It's an American company founded by veterans with conviction. They built the whole thing around a simple idea. Do it right or just don't do it. They're definitely doing it right. We know because we drink it all day long. If you want coffee without theatrics, start with just black, whole bean if you grind it yourself, ground if you don't. No sweeteners designed to disguise mediocrity. No seasonal gimmicks masking weak beans. Just bold American roasted coffee that delivers what it promises. And if you prefer variety without lowering the bar, try these supply drop variety rounds, a curated lineup of pod roasts that rotate in but never compromise strength. Consistency, standards, discipline, out with watered down blends, in with pure American coffee. You can grab just black or supply drop variety rounds on Amazon or go right to blackriflecoffee.com to stock up from the source. Black Rifle Coffee, veteran-founded, American roasted, still standing, still brewing. What's so interesting is that you're at Penn State in 2004. Mm-hmm. The Iraq War has been in progress for a year. By that point, it's clear that we're not getting out anytime soon. Right. It started to get squirrely there. We can't really pacify it. Mm-hmm. And it's not just liberals who are starting to say, wait a second, and you're one of them. You're not a liberal in a conventional sense, but you think this war is bad. Mm-hmm. but you drop out of college to go anyway enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Figured I would get it over with. It was coming anyways.
But you didn't have to.
No, absolutely did not. The catalyst was the Battle of Fallujah in 2004. I, of course, had been in Afghanistan over the summer.
Yeah.
In the fall, Fallujah happened. I had friends who were involved in that. And I found myself thinking...
So you knew guys who were serving there?
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And, I figured it was my turn. I was going to do it anyways, but the war was really picking up. College would be there when I got back. And so just decided to get up and go and do it.
What'd your parents say?
As you can imagine, they were proud. I'll say that. But, it's, my dad always told me never enlist for a war. And I went ahead and did it. So I'm sure that there was a little consternation and that was largely based on the fact that, he had been